Okay, I think the best thing to do is kind of start at the beginning, and I wonder if you would just tell us what inspired you in the first place to enter the field of public relations as a career.
Well, I was interested in it, but I sort of backed into it, if you will, because my first job after finishing school was in the publicity department of MGM Pictures. And I really took that job because I thought it would be an entree into movie production. I kind of grew up in the movie business. My family owned movie theaters and things, so I was reading Variety before I read comic books, I think. And so this job opened up, and when I finished school, and I took it, as I said, for the reason that I thought I would get into, be an entree into movie production. But after working in the publicity department for a couple of years, I decided that I was interested in that field, and so that's how it evolved into the public relations business.
Well, what prompted you to start your own agency then?
Well, I didn't start it precisely on my own. I joined a fellow who had a small agency in Chicago named Cooper, and he needed somebody to sort of watch the store because he was involved in a lot of clients who were into sports television shows and things of that nature, and he was out as a co-producer of some of these shows in addition to doing public relations. So I was that guy who was the inside guy at that time.
Did you, at that point in time, think about starting an agency on your own, or was this just a natural outgrowth of that?
Well, I always was interested in starting a small public relations firm, and when I heard that he needed somebody in his firm, I thought it would be an easier opportunity rather than start from scratch. So he had a couple of clients, of small clients, and I soon became a partner in it after a couple of years.
Well, you have Golin Harris, the agency which you founded, is just celebrating its 50th anniversary. So what caused that actually to happen then?
Well, I never dreamt, 50 years ago that we'd be the size we are today with, over 30 offices around the world and all kinds of major organizations that we represent. And, it's great to have dreams, but I never dreamt that it would, turn into that sort of thing.
One of the famous stories about you is the fact that you made a cold call to a person by the name of Ray Kroc a few years after you started. Would you tell us about how that came and what happened after you made that call?
Well, actually, it was a cold phone call I made to Ray Kroc about a year after I joined Cooper in the small public relations firm. So we've had the McDonald's account now for around 49 years this year, but who's counting? But I did make a cold phone call to him. He had a very small office here in Chicago at LaSalle and Wacker. Somebody told me about this fledgling little company he was starting. It just had a handful of the old red and white tile McDonald's. And when I called him up, he said, "Come on over." So I went right over there, and after about a half hour, he said, "Okay, start Monday." And I told him our fee at that time was $500 a month. That was our going rate.
What did you pitch to him that he bought? What services did you say you were going to do for him?
Well, at that point, when they were so small, and I knew they were planning on opening quite a bit all over the country, I thought that public relations would be an economical way for them to get his story told. They couldn't afford national advertising, and they really couldn't afford any advertising of any kind at that point. So the first thing I told him that I thought we could be helpful in him selling franchises because that was his key consideration. So we tried to tell the story of how successful some of the existing franchisees were and how good investment this was for certain people to get into it. Now, when I say an investment, I don't mean just a monetary investment, because they never took people as investors. You had to really get involved and work to be a working franchisee.
But you then helped select the media that were used, and actually were you doing this all on your own, writing the stories?
Well, yeah, I was doing everything in those days. It was, I used to write the releases and type them and myself on an old Smith Corona, and then deliver them to the media and try to sell the stories to media around the country. But so it was kind of a, you know, it wasn't quite a one-man band, but it was pretty close to it.
What caused you to come up with the idea that you and I guess Ray hatched together of having a trust bank, what you called a trust bank? You coined the term, I believe.
Yeah, I think I did coin that term years ago, where this trust bank would be akin to building up deposits of goodwill in case you needed it later on. And I think that it was sort of confounded people in those days because McDonald's was such a small company selling 15-cent hamburgers, and getting involved in the community was not exactly the kind of thing that you expected them to do. It was more expected of banks and major companies like, you know, utilities and things like that, who got really involved in the community.
Was this a tough thing to sell to the franchisees, or the organization support this idea right from the beginning?
Well, it was kind of an easy sell in that sense because Ray Kroc had a very big interest in public relations. He had a flair for it, if you will. He was one of the, you know, he was sort of a public relations person's dream. If you told him he had to go to Muncie, Indiana for an interview, he'd say, okay, what time do we leave? Because he had a great feeling for it. So sometimes you can have, you know, great ideas for clients, but if they're not receptive, it doesn't mean anything. But he was always receptive from day one. He just felt good about it. And I think he came from a theatrical background. He was a musician, and he ran a radio station for a while in Chicago in the early days. Hired Amos and Andy as with their first jobs, and so he had this kind of flair for it. So I think he was an easy sell in that, from that standpoint.
Did he have at that time, or did McDonald's have at that time, any kind of a internal public relations staff?
No.
You were the sole.
No, we were the inside and the outside, if you will, because they really were so small they couldn't have any of those things. I started to say earlier, maybe in my talk about how we got started, there was a man named Sonneborn who was Kroc's partner, who was the financial guy with the company. Ray was sort of the Mr. Salesman, if you will, and but Sonneborn was the financial brains behind the company, and the man who came up with the real estate concept, which really made sense for them. And Sonneborn hated the idea that Ray Kroc hired us because when Ray brought him in that morning, when I came over to his office, he hit the ceiling and said, what are you hiring a public relations firm for? You and I can't even afford to draw salaries. So for the first couple of years, I ducked every time I saw Sonneborn. I didn't want to remind him of the $500 a month he was spending.
When did the idea of the Ronald McDonald houses, and how did that come about?
Well, the Ronald McDonald House program started in Philadelphia about 30 years ago. The local McDonald's franchisees were approached by the Philadelphia Eagles football team. The Eagles had a player whose daughter had leukemia, and the player told everybody what a hard time it was for families of seriously ill children, because they had no place to stay around the hospitals. And a lot of them couldn't afford to stay in hotels. So that whole concept of building a house near a major children's hospital where parents and the children themselves could stay while they were being treated came about. So it started there, and then the local franchisees around St. Patrick's Day decided to devote the proceeds of Shamrock shakes, milkshakes, to be devoted to building this house. And sales were so good that the house was built in a very short period of time. So I went to go look at this house in the when it first opened, And I thought it was such a good idea that I recommended to the company that they expand the idea, and you could open these houses, I thought, in almost every major city. So while I certainly can't take credit for creating the concept, which I didn't do, but I did recommend that they go national, and never dreaming it would be even international. They would open in Moscow and Tokyo and Stockholm and Brazil and wherever. But that's how really the whole concept started.
Did you equate this with being part of the trust bank and taking something out, or was there a relationship that you saw between the two?
Oh, absolutely. I thought it was a natural for, I think, and still to this day, I think clients will come to us and will say, well, give us a Ronald McDonald House idea. And those things are not easy to come by. It would be very easy if you could manufacture this thing. But it absolutely fit the bill as far as a statement about their involvement in the community, because it was so important for McDonald's to become part and parcel of the local community. And what better way to illustrate that, by having your name on the door, if you will, too, of all these houses. So it really has been a very heartwarming experience in many ways.
In recent years, Golin Harris has become well known for having created the idea of a trust index, the Golin Harris Trust Index, which is now a measure of some form of corporate social responsibility. What's the connection between the Ronald McDonald Houses, McDonald's, and you're coming up with that idea?
Well, the word trust has always been part and parcel of our credo at Golin Harris, even before it became fashionable. Now today, everybody seems to be talking about the word, which is great, but because I think they realize that without trust, a lot of these major companies would be in trouble. And the whole trust index was something that we came up with some research on in testing what the index was as far as trust is concerned with some of the major companies in the country. And we've even expanded it to go to Asia and Europe as well. So we try to come up with this index to see how well a company is doing in terms of its trust quotient, if you will.
How broad, when you use the term trust, how broad are the issues that you cover as far as what constitutes trust?
Well,
if I've explained it in some meaningful way.
Well, trust is so important, I think. It's so important in everything we do in terms of business or in our personal lives, because without it, you can't really function. And it even caused me to write a book about it a couple of years ago, because we used the word trust. And then when the Enrons and the WorldComs came about with all the scandals of the first part of this century, somebody came to me and said, well, why don't you do a book on the subject, because you've always talked about trust. So somebody contacted me, an agent called me, and like a lot of things in life, I didn't react until I had a deadline. So when they committed to do the book, then I had to sit down and figure out how to do it.
Well, I think that your book, Trust and Consequences, has actually become one of the best books on the subject that has been written and is now available for people both in corporations and agencies to really get a sense of what the issues are. And I wonder if you would just describe, for the purposes of this activity, what some of the big issues are that you feel that corporations and agencies face that relate to trust.
Well, for example, I interviewed some CEOs of some of the major companies that I admired and wanted to get their feelings on it. And one of them was a man named Ralph Larson, who was the former CEO of Johnson & Johnson, because I had heard he coined a term called a trust mark. I almost got mixed up with my trust bank. But and I always thought that was a great term. So when I called him about it, and he spent a long time on the phone with me being interviewed, And he said he thought that he always told his people at Johnson & Johnson that you don't have a trademark in this company, you have a trust mark. And if anybody fouls that up, you have me to answer to, he said. So I was very impressed with what he talked about, and I thought that was very interesting because it summed up almost everything you've thought of with the word trust. Everything you do as far as your ethical standards of behavior, whether you're an employee or your treatment with customers, or almost everything you do is related to the word trust. Because I think if you lose the word, if you lose trust, you've really lost almost everything you have.
Do you suggest ways that companies or agencies or individuals can build trust in your book, Trust and Consequences?
Well, I think that whether you're an employee or whether you're treating your suppliers or your ultimate customers, you have to keep the word trust in mind with everything you do. So I don't think it's a matter of one single thing, and it's not a quick fix. It's a long-term process where you have to build up these deposits, if you will, in this trust bank, so that it does make some sense to, if a company does have a problem or a crisis, the public or your employees would not think ill of you and would think that you're not the kind of company that would violate that trust.
Is trust, or having a reputation for trust, solely dependent on the CEO and the CEO's involvement?
No, I think the CEO sets the tone, and the CEO is very important for setting the tone for the trust, but I think it has to be carried out in every department of a company.
So in other words, a company could have a reputation for being trusted or a positive, let's say like an Enron could have had, but the CEO actually, the actions did them in.
Well, I think
is that fair?
Well, I think in that case it was not just the CEO. I think, but he must have set a tone in that company where all the others didn't think of the word trust. I think they violated it almost in every step of the way because they were taking shortcuts and things of that nature. I think you'll find that a lot of the newer companies, now this is a generalization and it may not be completely accurate, but a lot of the newer companies have been taking shortcuts because they have so much pressure on them sometimes to come up with the right earnings quarter after quarter. So they'll do things that aren't quite ethical. And in doing so, they've really destroyed the reputation of that company forever. And I think that's a case in point at Enron.
Al, is there an opportunity here, or what are the opportunities for the person in public relations or corporate communications to have an impact on a CEO's behavior in a situation like that?
Well, I think that a public relations person has a great chance to have a strong influence if he or she has the credibility within that organization. And I think sometimes therein lies the problem, that some public relations people are not taken seriously by their top management. And that's a danger because the CEO may say, well, that's very nice to hear, but what has that got to do with the mainstream of our business? So I think that the average public relations officer of a company, or anybody within departments for that matter, has to gain the credibility of top management, or else they're not going to be effective. They'll go through the motions, but they won't have any influence at all that they really need to have in a time, such as giving advice to a top CEO.
Now you're talking about a very significant thing from a public relations standpoint, and that's the ability of a person in the practice of public relations to develop credibility. What characteristics does someone have to have that kind of a reputation where their advice is going to be welcome and followed?
Well, I think a public relations person in an organization has to really prove that they deserve the credibility by knowing the company as well as anybody else in that company. They can't just know their own particular phase of the business. If it's a company that has distribution as part of their business, they have to know what all the nuances are of that distribution system, and they have to know everything about sales and manufacturing and things of that nature, because they'll never be taken seriously if they keep themselves isolated to think that they only want to concern themselves with what they do on a day-to-day basis.
What I hear you saying, that for a public relations person to be effective is that they have to know more than just the discipline of public relations. They really have to have a broad knowledge about the company or the organization that they work for. Is that fair?
No, that's very fair. I think that's been something that I've talked about for a long time, because I think it's critical to the success of our whole industry. We want to be taken seriously. We want to be considered as part of top management of companies and of counselors, in our case, who might represent these companies. So we have to know the companies as well as they know themselves.
When selecting people for your organization, Golin Harris, what characteristics do you look for in the individuals? What qualities or talents or abilities do you believe that someone ought to have in order to qualify for a job, either at a senior level or an entry-level job?
Well, I think that I've always felt strongly that individuals should be well-rounded. It's great to be, to have the skills in writing and communicating and oral skills and things of that nature. And that's very important. I think those are givens. But I looked for people who are more rounded in everything they do, whether it's sports or the arts or economics. And I know it's a big a big order, and you can't always have everything like that. But I try to encourage our people to become well-rounded. No one impresses me if they try to tell me that they're workaholics, because I think being a workaholic is one thing, and I work as hard as anybody. But I do think that I like to take time to be rounded and be interested in the theater or in sports or in business in general, and because I don't think we're going to be able to continue to counsel our clients if we're not really able to communicate with them on all these levels. I'll give you an example, a funny thing. I had dinner not that long ago with the head of a major advertising agency, and I was telling him about a movie I had seen the night before, and he was boasting to me that he hadn't seen a movie in 20 years. And I kept thinking, why is he bragging about that? Here's a guy who's supposed to be able to communicate on what's current and what's going on today, and have the pulse of what's happening. And he was sort of boasting to me that he hasn't seen any kind of a movie in 20 years. I figured, well, I'm sure he hasn't watched any television or heard any videos or seen any plays or anything of that nature, or read any books even, if you want to go to that extreme. He was just talked about how hard he works, and he had no time for anything else.
Well, you've already said that you're not impressed by someone who says they're a workaholic. What other turnoffs are there for you that if somebody says something or their behavior is such that either you reject them or they get in your doghouse, or you say sayonara, or what? I mean, if the being well-rounded is a good thing, what's the opposite of that?
The opposite of being well-rounded? Well, maybe too interested in maybe an organization they might belong to, and they might devote all of their waking hours to that organization. And I'm not saying that it may not be worthwhile. It may be a terrific thing to do. But I've seen people who get so wound up in an outside activity of some sort or another, that they neglect what they're here to do on a day-to-day basis. So there's that balance, that delicate balance that you're always looking for. You don't want anybody to be a workaholic, but by the same token, they still have to understand that, you know, we're here to do our daily jobs, and when they're neglected and they spend more time on their outside activities, those are the things that might turn me off.
Do people coming out of college programs, I assume you hire recent college graduates or journalism graduates or whatever, is there an education that you look for? Is being educated in public relations or mass communications equate to a liberal arts background, or how does that all, in your judgment?
Well, I like to have, you know, I think that having, you know, the academic skills are important, but I like to have somebody who knows something about sales even. Now, this may sound a little far afield, but I think that selling is not a dirty word. I think that some of the top people in our business are pretty good salesmen too. They have to not only sell the clients that we're involved in, that this is a good idea and they should pursue this, but sell people who work for them. And it's a constant selling job. I think that some companies, major companies, have hired CEOs who've had no experience at all in sales. They might be chief financial officers, or they might be in manufacturing part of the business, and I think that's fine. But I think that they have to have some sales background, knowing what makes their customers tick, and what makes their employees tick as well. Because I think that the selling concept, it permeates all areas of a person's job. So when I see, I've seen certain CEOs of major companies fail because they came out of the other ranks, and when I say sales, these are people who feel uncomfortable talking to media people or to their own employees, and they're so introverted that they may not be able to communicate properly. I mentioned Ralph Larson of Johnson & Johnson. I go back to Johnson & Johnson not because they're a client, which they're not, but because I think they're one of the quintessential good guys, and they always have been in terms of their ratings and things. And he always said that he spent 75% of his time communicating, internally and externally, and selling, if you will, whether it's security analysts on the quality of the stock, the value of the stock, or the people who work for him, because he felt that that was such a big part of his job description. But I think too many boards of directors forget about that when they're looking for CEOs.
In our world, you've mentioned sales as being important, which I think, and the ability to sell. Where does creativity fit into your thinking as far as a characteristic or quality of people you hire?
I think creativity is an extremely important element of our business, and it always will be. No matter how the media may change over the years, I think being creative is still gets the juices flowing. And one of the things I always enjoy doing at the office is getting involved in brainstorm meetings. Whether it's an existing client or a new client prospect that we're working on, I always like to get involved in that process, because the creative part of it is still one of the things that got me interested in being in this business.
You've, by your own admission now, this firm's been here for 50 years. What changes have you observed in the practice of public relations over that period of time, from when you started to where we are today?
Well, some of the big change, of course, is technology. I don't think anybody dreamt of how the importance of technology would take over everything we do in our lives, really, and certainly so important in the business that we're in, which, you know, because of communication is so is our business. So naturally, technology has certainly come into play in such a major way. But I think there's a danger here too, because I think that with all this technology, we have to balance some of that with I like to call high touch. I didn't create that term. It started a few years ago with a guy named John Naisbitt, who wrote a book called Megatrends, which maybe you and I would remember. But he talked about high tech and high touch before all the tech really came in. He was sort of way ahead of his time. And I think that I love to borrow that term because I think we all have to be so conscious of balancing that high tech with some human element, which is the high touch part of it. Because I like to talk about a guy who used to sit 50 feet from me in my office, who's no longer here, who would constantly send me emails and voicemails and never come in to discuss anything. And I think that I was constantly asking him, why don't you come in and let's talk about this? But I think too many people today want to get rid of something. They call somebody and they're shocked when you answer the phone because they'd rather leave a voicemail. They don't want to talk to anybody. So I think that's a real danger, and I think I'm guilty of it too sometimes. That I'm always amazed when somebody will answer their phone and I just wanted to get rid of a subject and leave them a voicemail. But I think that's a danger. I like to talk about an old radio show that existed, and radio, you remember? You may remember radio, where there was a guy who was a door-to-door salesman, and he was an introverted guy, and he was hoping on hope no one would be home when he knocked on their door. And I think today, all this technology is a crutch where people hope no one would be home, so they don't have to confront anybody or even discuss it, let alone confront anybody.
It's a very interesting observation, which I'm not going to pursue, but let me come back to the changes thing for a minute. It appears to me, and this would be something that would be beneficial to you, I would guess, is that corporations are doing more and more outsourcing of work that traditionally they may have done themselves. And it would seem to me that there are definite benefits to the corporations for doing this, particularly from a financial standpoint, employee head count, and that sort of thing. What obligations does this put on an agency to be the recipient of what greater variety of things that they may be asked to do for their clients? How does that work?
Well, I think that a lot of the companies who are outsourcing these days obviously is a boon for the agency business, because it's selfishly it's good for our business, and I think that's caused a lot of the growth of the PR agencies versus corporations. So I think it does give us a little more heat, if you will, on performing well, because sometimes we have to make decisions for these companies without discussing it as much as we'd like to, because they're relying on us to do almost everything for them. And that's flattering in many ways, but I do think that we like the input of the client as well. So I think we have to, again, achieve that balance of not going over the line. We can represent clients as we do and be their spokespeople and all that when it's necessary. But some of the major companies still insist on having their own corporate spokespeople, and I think that's healthy. So I think there's always going to be that give and take. We like to think that we're partners with our clients, and I know that word is overused a lot, but I think that in order for us to have any long-term relationships, we have to have that partnership feeling, because it's not them against us in any way, because we're not going to be successful if that happens. And it can happen, where sometimes a client can resent the outside agency because they're not living with the client on a day-to-day basis as they are. But so I think that if they realize that we're not out to compete with them, we're out to enhance their position, then it becomes a healthy relationship, and then it lasts a long time.
Is it possible for an agency like yours today to be quote, a full-service agency that would handle marketing problems, crisis communications, investor relations, internal relations, government relations, or is there going to be more of a tendency to create boutique agencies downline that will specialize in these various fields rather than be a total package?
Try to be,
It may not
yeah.
be a fair question, I'm not sure.
Well, for an agency such as ourselves these days, we like to think of ourselves, as full service
Right.
because we're large enough. And I'm not saying that the boutique type agencies aren't going to have a value and exist, because I think they will. I think there'll be a place for both. I think when a major company who is global, for example, wants an international agency of record, they're looking to an agency that has all these capabilities. So we have to do those things whether we like them or not. And so we have to have the capabilities in order to compete with the major agencies. We have to have offices in Washington, and we have to be represented in Brussels and things of that nature. So we have to be almost all things to everybody. And I know that's difficult because there are a few agencies that really do specialize in just a couple of niches. And I think they'll do well. They'll continue to do well. But for agencies such as ourselves, who do want to represent a global company, we have to be able to have all those capabilities.
Can you find the people that will fill those kinds of responsibilities?
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy to find people because that's what we're all about. And finding the right people is absolutely the name of the game. And keeping them happy and moving them along at the right level so they know they have a future within rather than without is extremely important. I do think that sometimes we like to say we built up a culture here where we don't have a laundry list of clients like certain agencies do, who boast about that, and I think that's fine. But we like to say we have fewer clients, and we like to have more meaningful partnership relations with them, because we like to have people work on clients who really don't just give it a lick and promise. Because certain agencies will have people working on 10 clients, and we don't think you can really get to know that kind of company well enough to be effective.
Now, just to shift gears here a little bit, and you may have to really scratch your head to find an answer to this next question, but what was the biggest challenge you faced during your career to date?
Biggest challenge in terms of a client, you mean, or in
Client
anything?
or anything you might have found that really tested your ability to solve the problem?
Well, sometimes we're now owned by another company,
Right.
as many firms are these days, where they're larger companies that own advertising agencies and promotion agencies and related kinds of companies. And that's a challenge because we like to separate ourselves from that, if you will, and retain what we think we've built up over the years. So probably the biggest challenge is to retain the culture that we've built up and not be sublimated by the parent company. And that's a constant thing that we go through, and I think they respect that and have given us that opportunity. And I know from other people in the industry, they don't quite get that, and so there's a terrific amount of stress sometimes in connection with that, of being owned by somebody else. And that's always a challenge after starting a business and being your own person, in trying to retain what you have built up over the years. And yet you want to grow and you want to utilize all the other things that they might offer. So again, it's that balancing act that's so important. But it's probably maybe one of the major challenges I can think of.
Well, I think that's an exceptionally good answer, because it causes me to ask you a follow-up question to that, and that is, it seems like that the advertising agencies, or some of the major advertising agencies, are the acquirers of bona fide public relations firms like yourself. And I'm not sure whether that's a healthy thing or not, to have the advertising as a specialty be the acquirer, as opposed to public relations, which I would perceive as be more all-encompassing than advertising. So how does you deal with that kind of perceptions like that people would have?
Well, it is, as I said earlier, a challenge to separate the two, if you will. And I think that the smart ones, who are the parent companies, realize that it is a different kind of business. And you can't generalize about it as you can running, a promotion agency or something of that nature. That we do have a unique kind of business, and they respect that. Hopefully, you've convinced them, or you've given them enough reason to say, "I'm doing fine. I'm doing well. Don't tamper with this." I think it's, as I say, I think the smart ones will respect that and leave you alone and try to have you retain what you do best.
Who over your career would you say has had the most influence or been most significant in your life to help you stay on the right track and grow and develop as you have?
Well, if my wife is listening, I would say she would be, but as long as she's probably not going to hear that. No.
That's a good answer. That's what I would say first.
Right. She keeps, well, my wife likes to say that one of her main missions in life is keeping me humble, and
Yeah.
I think she's good at that. And,
Wonderful.
sometimes you get some praise from people, and you get awards, and you get, kinds of things, and, but she always keeps it in perspective when you get home, which I think is healthy.
Good.
And I think that I'm enjoying this stage of my life because I think I'm able to pick and choose the things I want to do. Somebody once asked me, well, when are you going to hang it up and play golf full time? Well, if anybody saw me play golf, they'd understand why I don't do it full time. But secondly, I really enjoy what I do, and I'm nervous about having my mind turned to jello, if you will, by not doing anything. I see these people that I know who have retired, and some in Arizona. I have a place out there where I go back and forth, who talk nothing about except golf, and I get so bored I want to walk out or yell or do something, and most of the time I don't yell, but I do walk away. But it's fine to play the game, but after a while they'll sit in the locker room and have a drink and talk about that, or you go to dinner with them and that's all you'll hear about at dinner, and I realize that I can't take that kind of existence, so I do go back and forth a lot and come back to the office from that kind of an atmosphere. And
I'm going to try and bring you back to the question.
oh, I'm sorry, did I deviate?
Which was there someone that you?
Someone. Oh, you're right. I try to bridge away from my wife.
You
right?
did. I didn't know
Almost
that
got
was
away with that, right?
intentional or not.
Almost
so
got away with it.
I wanted to come back
Oh.
and give you an opportunity at least.
Well, when I was growing up, I came from kind of a large family of cousins and things, and I was the youngest. Hard to imagine I'm the youngest of anything these days, but this guy was sort of a good influence, or I think he was a good influence. He was an ad person more than anything else, not PR, but I used to go have lunch with him a lot. He was with J. Walter Thompson here in Chicago, and I would have lunch with him at the Wrigley Building at that time a lot, and we'd talk about our lives. And he wrote a couple of movies, and he'd written songs. He wrote a Broadway show, and he was the kind of person that I always admired. He's very creative and energetic, and also a lot of fun. And I think he probably influenced me more in going into this business than anybody else.
Does he have a name?
Yeah, his name is Norman Retchen. His name is. He's not. Unfortunately, he's not with us these days. Died, but he was shot down. He was a pilot in World War II, and he was in a prison camp for a couple of years, and then came back and did resume his advertising career. But then he got tired of those people, and he wrote a couple of motion pictures and moved to Hollywood, and then subsequently moved to New York. He had a couple of Broadway shows, which never made it. I guess he didn't quite have enough talent to be that successful in the arts, but he always tried, and so he was sort of was my idol when I was growing up, and I used to spend a lot of time with him at these lunches, and I think that's what prompted me to think about this as a career.
This is just an aside, but the old J. Walter Thompson office, which would have been here when you and I both were
Right.
getting underway, had a lot of extraordinary people in it.
They did,
No
yeah,
question
that's
about
right. It used to be over here in the Wrigley, as you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right across the street.
Right.
But anyway, what are of your accomplishments over this past 50 years or so would you be most proud of? I know you can say the Ronald McDonald houses would be one of them, but I just wonder if there are others that would.
Well, the one thing, it's funny, speaking of the Ronald House, because is somewhat related, I was speaking in Sao Paulo, Brazil, about a year ago at some conference, believe it or not, and some doctor came over to me after the speech and said something which I never forgot. And he said, you probably don't know this. He said, but you were probably key to changing the culture of this country. And I said, I was, sort of taken aback, and I said, that's very flattering, but what do you mean? And he said, well, before there were Ronald McDonald houses, he said, Brazil never had any community involvement from major companies. They just didn't get involved. The government took care of everything. But since the house opened, he said, it opened the doors for a lot of major companies to come forward and get involved with hospitals and healthcare and community involvement and things of that nature. And he said, I think that was the single most important element. So that made me really feel good. And I do think that sometimes when you do travel, I like the international part of the business today more than anything. Maybe because it reminds me of the old days and it's newer and that sort of thing. And when I travel and I go somewhere and realize that people are people all over the world and have the same likes and dislikes, and while the cultures may be somewhat different, I think the basic things that we talk about and do to recommend for our clients, for example, can be exported in almost every country in the world. And I don't mean that we shouldn't be sensitive to the different cultures and not just try to ram things down their throats if it's not, within their kind of culture. But I do think that we can be sometimes influenced by the naysayers who will say you can't do this or you can't do that. This won't work in Japan or this won't work in Russia. And sometimes I found that when you don't know any better, you're better off because if you listen to the naysayers, you'll never do anything. So we found that by motoring ahead, when we have a good gut feeling about something, you're usually right.
We talked a little bit about or you did, about the challenges that you confronted, and one of the major ones. What challenges do you see facing the what would be known as the public relations profession or other executives today, and how do the challenges that you are about to identify, how can they be resolved or met?
Well, I think that we might have a tendency today with all this technology to overreact and try to take out of the human element out of the whole thing. And I think that's a danger. Technology changes, as we all know, so fast that, who would have predicted, these things happening. I was supposed to give a talk, and I'm still supposed to give a talk soon about the next 50 years in public relations. And I'm reminded of the guy who gave a talk, I don't know, about 10 years ago, who predicted there'd be helicopter pads on every major building in the United States. Well, obviously it didn't happen. So I think that you can overreact to things and be influenced by this to a dangerous extent. And I don't mean I want to turn the clock back on a lot of things, because I would like to in many cases, but there is no turning the clock back. That I think that newspaper readership is going to be almost decimated in the next 10, 20 years. And I hate to see that, because I've been such a great proponent of that since I was a kid. And I've always been kind of a news junkie. And I just hate to see something like the newspapers die out. And I do see that they're having so many problems. Young people just aren't reading them. And it's true, you can get things online almost everywhere you go, but it's not the same. So it's again, not letting technology rule everything. To try to keep the human element is going to be an extremely important thing for all of us.
I want to come back to that subject in a little bit, but I wondered about, in the area of challenges, whether you were bothered by public relations being associated with spinning or PR being used as pejorative terms, and if that bothers you at all, the general connotation that public relations sometimes generates, or if you have ideas or ways that you think that can be overcome, or whether it should just be ignored.
Well, I am still bothered by the term being put down by a lot of people who don't know anything about the business we're in. We'll even hear, perish the thought, certain clients say, give us some of that PR stuff, and and I said, what do you mean, lie, or spin or lie, right? But I think that's a real danger of our of the business, and I don't think we have to be so thin-skinned that we can't handle that. But I do feel that we have to respond wherever we do hear that kind of thing, because there are still a lot of people around who don't know what we do in our business and still think that we buy advertising or create advertising. And so it's a constant educational job. But I must say it's a lot better than it was. Obviously, things have evolved. It used to be, too, when public relations would be the first thing cut, when budgets were curtailed. And companies would say, well, where do we have it? Where can we cut down? It was always public relations before advertising and before almost anything else. But today we found that even in times when the economy is soft, public relations still does well. And I think that their companies are more sophisticated now. They realize they do need it. And I think many of them need it for or think they need it for the wrong reasons, because they've seen things happen when they didn't have good public relations, or they've seen, a president like Nixon go down, because of some of those things. So, and companies like the Enrons and the WorldComs in trouble. So sometimes I think that has benefited public relations, in the sense that people realize that they need good public relations in order to combat those things and ward those things off.
Do the actions of other agencies that may be nailed for either overbilling or underpaying their employees, or not being totally forthcoming in the hiring of certain people to perform certain acts, does that, in your judgment, tend to pollute the environment for everybody, or is that something that we can just move on and not particularly worry about?
No, I think that is certainly a negative influence. I think that, this may not be the same answer to or the right answer to your question, but for example, we have never represented tobacco companies. We just feel like that's not our style. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the major companies do, major public relations firms, and I've had that discussion with them about that. And their answer has always been, well, these companies deserve representation like anybody else. And that's, I'm sure it's true, and that's a good legal answer. But we don't want to just do things that are legal, if you will. We want to do things that we feel good about. And if we don't feel good about representing certain kinds of clients, we just don't take them. And I'm not saying that we're not in business. Of course we're in business, and we're here in business to make a profit. But I think that you can be short-sighted in taking certain kinds of clients on if your people are not happy about representing them, or if you don't feel good about it. So I think that you have to be very careful about quick fixes and short-term solutions with things, and look at the bigger picture.
I think you provided an unusually good answer for ethical situations, and where there are agencies that are willing to take either side of an issue, and occasionally there are agencies that are in the process of taking both sides of a controversial issue, whether it maybe is something that is political or otherwise. And what I'm hearing you say is that Golin Harris probably would not do that or take any client that they were not comfortable with representing, regardless of what might be they might be able to earn in the way of fee income. Is that fair?
No, that is fair. We have turned down. We've turned down tobacco companies over the years for that very reason. And we turned down a country or two, believe it or not, who wanted representation because we didn't feel that they were, you know, the right kind of country for us to represent. And we didn't think our people, again, would be happy working on that kind of business. So I think we have to be sensitive to that area about, about what we feel in our own mind, because if we ever have a doubt about something, we usually take a pass on it. And I think that's true in life in a lot of things, that you usually your gut feeling is more right than wrong.
Circling back to a subject you touched on a little bit ago, most of us have grown up being able to use the traditional media to influence public opinion one way or the other. We felt that one of the major responsibilities of public relations was to be able to influence public opinion. With the changes in the media structure that we foresee now, how easy is it going to be to use traditional media to influence public opinion, and what substitutes are there for that if newspaper readership, as you said earlier, and TV listenership or viewership is going down? How does the public relations person who wants to make a change or create change, what do they do?
Well, it's very difficult because when I started in business, there were 3 television networks to deal with, and you could reach 90% of the audience with any of those 3 networks, or there were major outlets with certain magazines. Today there are thousands and thousands of magazines, and thousands of websites and blogs, and who would have thought of all these blogs? They're starting by the thousand, almost a daily basis. So you almost have to go after individuals more than ever before. I think the whole mass market thing is dwindling, that you have to tailor your messages to specific audiences rather than try to just be all things to everybody. And I think that the average public relations person has to be very conscious of that. And I think we have to be protective of that in the sense of the competitors like advertising agencies who may want to get into that business because they're looking for new ways to have income. Their business is down, and because of this traditional media being off. So they're looking for ways to reach audiences. So they're getting into areas where it used to be just public relations people. Mm-hmm. There's a gray area right now of who does what.
In in one sense, you're saying that public relations is going to be more involved in market segmentation and audience recognition than they ever have been in the past, and this is actually stealing a chapter out of an advertising textbook.
Well, it is. It is, and it's media, of course, is the same kind of thing, whether you're advertising or you're doing public relations. And I think that you constantly have to, you know, we hate to have advertising influence public relations. You know, when we grew up, we always said that was a no-no. You know, that advertising had nothing to do with public relations, and sometimes, you know, if we were in a newspaper office and talked to a reporter about a client and said, by the way, they're a big advertiser in your newspaper, the average reporter would throw us out because they say that, you know, that's not cricket. So, and we hope it still won't be that way. But today it is blurring a lot, where a lot of ad agencies are buying time on certain shows and think they can get messages within the body of that show as an add-on, whether it's the product placement or whether it's mention or whether it's talking about a particular industry. So there is, that's the danger of that sort of thing. And I think we have to be conscious of all the new media, but we also have to be conscious of what we do and what they do.
This is a little bit of a side. It's always was true in the movie industry, but it seems like it's even more so in some of the recent movies I've seen where there have been product placements and messages that the tobacco industry has been superb at this is regenerating.
That's right, where they can't buy advertising. they figure they've got big budgets, and a lot of them, of course, got into things like NASCAR and other sports sponsorship in order to get their name across, because they can't get involved. They can't buy the advertising, particularly those kinds of companies.
Do you see branding as a part of advertising or public relations? How do you see the subject of branding these days?
Well, I think somebody I know who was a great marketing guy said to me that without trust, a brand is nothing. So I think that public relations builds trust in a brand, and that's a very important thing. And you can buy a lot of advertising if you're Coca-Cola, but it won't necessarily make it a trusted brand if you don't do certain things to complement that sort of thing. So I think that in our business we have to be very conscious of brand, and I don't think there are a lot of purists in our business too who say we should not have anything to do with marketing or brands or things of that nature. Well, I've never believed that. I've always felt that this was a very important part of what we do. And I think if we take ourselves too seriously sometimes and worry about the word profession, I think it's a danger. I think we have to realize this is a business, and you have to think of it as a business as well as a profession, and not let the other part of it overrule the fact that it is business.
Al, you were talking about the perception of public relations and the range of activities that are covered and how important marketing itself was as one of the many disciplines that might be embraced within the public relations umbrella. I wonder if what your view would be of accreditation of public relations people or licensing of public relations people, whether you think that is appropriate or something that is necessary, or whether it's just a pipe dream that could probably never be accomplished.
Well, I'm probably going to offend some of my brethren in public relations, but I've never been a great one for just labeling us as a profession, because I don't think we should we obviously should take ourselves seriously. That's what we do, but not to a stuffy point of view, and try to make us feel self-important and not get involved in the day-to-day things that we do best for our companies or our clients. So in other words, I'm not really hung up on accreditation and things of that nature. I'd rather be worry about somebody being really adept at being a broad professional in our business and have a knowledge of everything concerned in our business, rather than just to worry about it being, just a profession. It is a business after all, and I don't think we should forget the fact that we work for our clients, we work for our companies, and we have to be in the mainstream in order to be taken seriously.
Well, having said that, is there a role for continuing education for people working within this discipline? And what types of education would be beneficial to mid-career people or even senior people?
Oh no, I think there's a constant role of education and training. We feel very strongly about it here, and we're constantly conducting training classes and things of that nature in anything and everything you could think about in terms of obviously the new media and technology, but also things about business in general. So I think that I'm still learning, and I hope that that people in our business will continue to do so, because otherwise they just won't be any good at it.
Are these something that could be done or best handled by existing universities and colleges or educational institutions, or is there a role for the professional societies to have responsive type education programs?
Well,
or
I
does
think
it make a difference?
well, no, I think a little of both, and I think professional societies are doing a lot more these days in that area, and I really salute them for that. I think that's a terrific thing, and I've attended a couple of them on my own. I've spoken at a couple of them, and we send some of our people to them, and they always come back highly stimulated, and I think it's very well worth it. And because I think our business, like a lot of things, is a constant evolution. Unless we're current, we're not any good at anything we do. I like to say that I hope somebody throws me out if they think I'm just this fuddy-duddy walking in and making some noise at the wrong time. And because I do think that we have to be current and we have to know what's going on, because otherwise we're not effective.
Earlier we talked about ethical behavior and performance and the role of the CEO in setting a tone within a corporation. What do you view, or do you have a view on the value of mission statements and credos and things of that nature, which some companies have and other companies dismiss? What's your viewpoint?
Well, I think mission statements are fine if you really live by them on a day-to-day basis. There's too many companies that come up with a lofty mission statement, and they'll put it on their website or maybe once, or they'll have a little booklet on it. But if that's the way it is, then I think it's meaningless. I think you have to live by the mission statement on a day-to-day basis and be constantly reminded of it, and make it as practical as possible, and something that really is part and parcel of your culture. Because otherwise, I think it's just it's a feel-good thing for a few people, and it's meaningless.
Do you have an ethics training program for your people, or an indoctrination thing for the people within your organization, or something that would be similar to that to get all the players on the same page?
Well, we do that certainly when the new people who start with us get a booklet about that, and they're shown certain videos and certain obviously the website. We constantly try to reinforce that sort of thing. So we do talk a lot about it, and we have a strong intern program that we've had for quite a few years in all of our offices, where we hire a good number of people out of that intern program. and they come from all walks of life. They're not necessarily just the traditional kinds of students. So we look for people who are really interested in this, or certain people who might want a career change. We've had a couple of lawyers and a couple of accountants who wanted to get into this business, and they've turned into pretty good practitioners.
You mentioned Ralph Larson earlier in the importance that he placed on talking with and communicating with both internal and external audiences. One of the things that Johnson & Johnson, of course, is known for is their credo, which I understand that they have a session on it annually for all of their employees. Is that something that you feel is beneficial or you could replicate, or I mean not you personally, but
Yeah,
would
I
be
think
a good thing?
No, I think it's a very good thing, and I think that they're a good example of a company that has lived by that. You know, I guess they're a 100-year-old company, and certain companies that have lasted seem to be the ones that do have those kinds of values. Again, you know, it's a generalization, but some of the companies that have gotten in trouble, like the WorldComs and the Enrons and the Tycos, have been quick fix kinds of situations where they've overreacted to Wall Street and have taken so many shortcuts and played so many games that they shouldn't have, that they've really destroyed the company long term.
One of the things I want to definitely touch on, because we're doing this for the Page Center in Penn State, which is also associated, as I think you know, with the Arthur Page Society. The two are working together, and one of the things that both of them has set out as a course of action is to help individuals to become counselors, or better counselors to leadership within basically the corporate world. How do you think these organizations or individuals can help fulfill or realize an objective like that of helping individuals to become, quote, counselors to leadership, which is largely something that you have done very successfully?
Well, I think they have to, and they do, I know, in many cases, bring in people who've had direct firing line experiences, and not just the professors. Professors are important, and that's great, but I do think they need to have people who've had good case histories and things that they've learned from, the do's, the good, the bad, and the ugly of some of the activities they've been involved in. And I think that's very important for the Page Society to continue to do. And I think they've done a great job in that sense so far, and I hope they continue.
The Page Center is starting out, and it is in the early stages of its development, and really wants to become a center that will be recognized actually worldwide for a source of learning about ethical and responsible behavior on the part of individuals and corporations, and this particular activity is a part of that, but they'll also ask professors from around the world to submit papers on this general subject, which they plan to republish or make available on their website. Are there other things that what might occur to you that the Page Center could do to help encourage people to act more responsibly or ethically? Are there other devices, whether it be speeches, appearances before conferences, or competitions, or whatever?
Well, I think all those are good. I think certainly competition is good. It points up the need for it, and I think that the competition idea is good to bring into all the various schools that are offering communications and public relations and journalism, wherever it fits, to have maybe a national Page Award for a student that has written something that personifies what the right ethical behavior is for a company in a certain kind of situation. That's not necessarily the concept, but if you will, as almost a Nobel Prize of ethical behavior. And that might be a great thing for Page to do. Or to cite really, or maybe to single out a company that best personifies that sort of thing on an annual basis. You know, the Pritzker Prize for architecture is always a prestigious thing and always gets a lot of good attention. And you know, that's our business, so we should know, we try to recognize the right kinds of public relations opportunities for ourselves. And that might be a good one to have the Page Prize, you know, for something that to be given maybe on an annual basis of that nature, and maybe to tie it in with a dinner, an annual dinner, maybe where you'd bring in students and honor some students from around the country at that dinner, and of course certainly honor the companies. And I know they do some of that kind of thing. You know, it's at various at the Page conferences, but maybe open it up to a broader business audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, your thought is a wonderful extension of the idea of the case writing competition that the Page Society does now, and I think really is something that the center could focus on. I'm down to about my last question or so, and one of the things that I didn't cover earlier was whether you were bothered by the fact that many people have dropped using the term public relations as part of their title and are now vice presidents of corporate communications or something else. In fact, the Page Society directory, it's like 5 or 6 to 1 as far as the terminology. The public relations sort of is diminishing as part of title.
Yeah.
Does that, I mean, I know that this affects you and your business as well. Does that resonate with you, or is it a concern, or is it just part of the way
Well,
things
it's
are?
never really, I can't say that I've lost any night's sleep over it, but I do, but I do think that, we get overly sensitive to it. I mean, when somebody asks me what I do, if I'm out playing golf, I meet somebody, I still say I'm in the public relations business. Right. And if and I'm not, you know, I don't think I'm embarrassed to say it, because I think sometimes if you say I'm in the communications business, that is so broad that you could be almost anything, and it takes away from what we really do. So I still think the term has relevance, and I'm continuing to use it, so I don't think it's a negative at all.
Yeah, I have to wrap this up, I have to say that I was more than pleased to get your calendar that had the list of some things that you had learned, or in fact there were 12 things that you had learned over the last 50 years. And I thought that that was sort of an inspired list of things. What started out with trust isn't everything, it's the only thing, and had a thing that's very characteristic of you in that if you've got it, don't flaunt it, and doing good is good for business, and don't overpromise. One of the latter, and you said selling is not a dirty word, which I think you amplified here. But one of the great things that you said wound up with was love it or leave it. And I think that you've been an example of a person who's loved what they are doing, and I think we're all fortunate and blessed that you never even considered, I think, of leaving it. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope somebody might learn a few things, and I know I enjoy doing it, and I do, I still enjoy coming to the office. I said, I hate to see people who resent going, you know, to the office on Monday mornings, and they only think about Friday afternoons. I think it's great to think about Friday afternoons, but you have to look forward to Mondays too.
Right. One of the things I want to say while the camera's still rolling here is that you appreciate that everything that we've just done is going to become the property of Penn State and the Arthur Page Center in Pennsylvania at Penn State, and that you and all of us here basically have just made a wonderful contribution to the center, and that if there is any significant changes in editing or things have said that you would be notified. But basically what we've got is what we've got, and so I wanted you to know that and say that we appreciate that on behalf of the people at State College,
My pleasure.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Okay, thank you.